Hi, this is Pete Gooding from Ibiza, musical director at Hostel La Torre, and you are listening to the Liverpool Connection podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Liverpool Connection podcast. I'm your host Daz. This is my football and music episode where I bring on a musician that's into obviously music and footy. And today I've got label boss from Terrorhythm, massive dubstep and grime artist, fantastic DJ and producer. It is Chris Reed, aka Plastician, formerly Plasticman, but not Richie Horton's Plasticman. Chris, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to getting into some footy talk.
Oh yeah, Chris is a United supporter, by the way, so please don't turn off. But you know, it's always good with Liverpool and Man United banter. You know, that's what football's all about, as long as it doesn't cross a line. But Chris, I know you were talking a little bit before we started recording. So you're a London lad. So you know, how did Man United come into your life then?
Well, when I was growing up, my dad was always into football. But his family and his dad and his grandparents and that, they're all from up north. So he's actually a Newcastle United fan. But there was never that pressure from him to support the same team he did. And my brother and I, were both quite into football growing up. And I think it was probably around that age. I think I was probably around 6, I would say, late 80s, Ron Atkinson era, when I decided to pick my team. And the only sense I can make of it really is back then, Mum used to take us to Wimbledon market on the weekends, and there was a stall at this market that was just selling like horrendously poor copies of football kits. You had to sew the badges on yourself and stuff like that. But it was essentially, Mum said to us, you can pick a kit. My brother at that point had actually been fortunate enough to attend his first football match, which was Crystal Palace. So that was his team. He was in like Cub Scouts or something like that, and that they had like a trip there. So he got to watch a live football match before I did. And so he picked Palace. Palace was his team. He picked this red and blue kit. And I picked a red kit. I didn't know what the team was, but I liked the red shirt, the white shorts, the black socks. And we got home. My dad's there, and he's got Match of the Day on. And I think it was, I want to say, I might be wrong, but for whatever reason, United were on television when we got back in that day. And he was like, we were showing my dad what kits we got. And he was like, oh, that's Man United. They're on telly. And if I remember, my memory serves me right, we were playing Nottingham Forest on the television. And that was it. That I then, went into school and decided that was my team, go take my kit into PE for the football practice after school and that. So that was the kit. I think the only other kind of attempts anyone had on trying to sway me any other way was my auntie, who lived in Enfield near the White Hart Lane. And one year for Christmas, she bought me and my brother football kits from the Tottenham club shop. So we had Tottenham kits as kids, but I'd already kind of set my heart on United, which didn't annoy my auntie too much. She was a massive fan of George Best growing up, so she liked Man United. But back then we didn't have the online shops or anything like that. She had the Tottenham shop on her doorstep, and that was what kit she could get for us. So we had Tottenham kits, and I say my brother grew up supporting Palace, who were the local team. So I picked United before I had any kind of idea of how far away that was in the British map. And I think as you grow up, you realise like it would have been a lot better if I'd have just picked Crystal Palace and been able to walk down the road and gone to the games. But I don't believe in choosing another team, changing teams. So I do have a soft spot for Palace, and I do follow them, and I do go to watch them quite a bit. But United's my team for that reason, and I've been a season ticket holder there through some of our better years. I could say quite happily. I think a season ticket holder, like 08-09 season, the Champions League winning one, and the 9-10 as well. And then things started to pick up for me work-wise, which meant I was away or I was missing multiple games a season. So the justification of spending the money on the season ticket, and then I started having kids, and it's just like now, as you probably know, and anyone listening to this will tell you, that travel is just expensive now, and I think this is a bigger reason now why you might be a little bit more inclined to push your kids into supporting the local. At 150, 200 quid on a hotel if you can't get home the same night. It's extortionate, and it makes even more difficult to kind of follow your team from the state. Obviously, you can watch them on TV easily enough now, but it's not enough. But it's the travel that's what's made it difficult, really.
It's crazy because you talk about Spurs. My my dad's not into football whatsoever, but worked in the Middle East a lot, and he one day brought me back a Spurs shirt that was signed by all the players. I guess they'd gone over there. I was like, "What is this?" Because my granddad was the one that always took me to see Liverpool, and I've just had it in my closet for like years and years, just going, "I don't support Spurs, Dad," but
Why have I got this here?
it had Stevie Archibald, Gary Mabbott, Glenn Hoddle on, and I didn't realise, until later on, like how good these players were. So yeah, it's still like in my closet, just collecting dust. But yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, to go to matches these days, it is really tough. And plus, we all know how British Rail is, especially if you're going to take a train. You don't know if you're going to make it there.
yeah.
It's just sad, but yeah, for I appreciate like being over in the States and how many people get up at crazy o'clock. Like if you're in LA, like you have to
Oh yeah.
watch early kickoffs at 4:30 in the morning. So, that's dedication. But who was your childhood footballing hero?
I would say it was probably Ryan Giggs and Sharp were like those were my guys growing up. And yeah, like through later on. So I said like early stages, Giggs, Sharp, Hughes were like the first sort of players I really remember watching. Giggs was sort of coming through at the time. It wasn't really until 1990, I think, that Giggs really broke through. But he was the first one where I was really like, that's how I wanted to play football. Like he made me want to be able to play on the wing and stuff like that. So Giggs was the first one where I was really like excited to watch Giggs. But yeah, I think even like players like Dennis Irwin, I loved Dennis Irwin as a kid. I free kick taking, let he was just a no nonsense. He was so good. Um, so he was definitely a player that I enjoyed watching. But Ryan Giggs particularly was one of the first ones. And then I guess like into the Fergie era, it was like Lee Sharp, um, obviously Cantona, Schmeichel. You can name the whole team from back then, really. Kanchelskis was a great player to watch as well. And I think a lot of my core memories of watching football growing up are that sort of like 8 to 13 years old, really, like watching football, watching I guess when I was 12, that would have been, so I was born in 82. So, the USA 94 World Cup, I remember watching that. That was like the first World Cup where I remember 1990 World Cup as well. We were on holiday watching it. But I remember, into that sort of, that was when football was all I was interested in at that age. I would get in from school, turn Eurosport on, watch all the highlights of the games that had gone on through the night. And, the USA 94 World Cup that was like a bit of an awakening for me in terms of watching before then, I probably would only watch Man United when it was on telly, and I'd watch Match of the Day. And when Man United had finished, I'd switch it off. Wouldn't be that bothered about watching the other teams. But from like 12 onwards, I would just any football. I think that World Cup '94, and England weren't in it. You know, it was like watching Republic of Ireland was about as close as it got to supporting like your country watching that one. But I was so engrossed in almost like the narrative and the story of the World Cup and the teams that, you know, like the Romanias and Bulgarias that ended up having great tournaments. And I was so engrossed in it that from then on, it was just like any football that's on telly, I'll find some interest in it, even if I've not got any, I don't support either team. And obviously back then, too young to have a bet on it or anything like that. But I was just invested in football so much that if I was indoors, I was either watching football or playing it on the PlayStation or Super Nintendo or whatever we had. And if it was dry, I was outside playing. So yeah, I just was obsessed with it growing up. Just yeah, constantly watching it and loads of heroes. But I'd say yeah, United ones. Giggsy was the first one that I really, and then I think a bit older would have been Cantona was a hero.
Yeah, I think you can always count on back in the day. There was two things that you did with your family, and that was watch Top of the Pops at Match of the Day. Like,
Yeah,
you get your sarnies ready and everything. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm a Liverpool supporter, but I'm also a football supporter. And, you know, I even hate saying this, but Ryan Giggs was just absolutely amazing. You know,
yeah,
he was one of the best wingers at the time. And obviously, you know, it took Fergie quite a few years to win the league. But then after you won the first one, it was like winning again and again and again. And as a Liverpool supporter, it pissed me off so much. You know, it all comes round. It's, you know, it was United's time, then
yeah,
Liverpool's, then a bit of Arsenal, a bit of Chelsea, United again. You know, now obviously it's City. Do you remember your first match at Old Trafford?
yeah. I do. It was a cup game. We played Reading, and it was 0-0. It was an awful game. I was sat up in the heavens, but I didn't care. It was more about being there and being able to. Back then, it was obviously being from London as well. By the time you get into your teens, I think I'll probably my first game at Old Trafford. I would hazard a guess at it being. I went up on my own, so I would have been a bit older by the time I got a ticket, and I think I would have been. I would imagine I was about 14, maybe 15 at the time. Um, it was really hard to get tickets back then, and obviously this is pre the internet and stuff. You would have had to phone up or queue up at the stadium. Obviously, not living in Manchester, you can't. It was difficult to do that, so everything was done over the phone back then, unless you knew someone who knew someone who had a ticket for you or something like that. And I think in that case, that was my experience. Was a friend of mine. Um, I'm not sure what his connection was, but his parents had some kind of connection to Bobby Charlton via like his foundation or something like that. Because he met Bobby Charlton a couple of times as well at like football sessions and things. And I'm not sure what the link there was, but somehow he managed to get hold of a ticket that was going spare for this like FA Cup game against Reading. And yeah, we went up there together. You know, we were in our teens, got the train up there, and yeah, 0-0 was a really poor game, but it was more about the experience for me. Yeah, there's no feeling like it as though like walking into the stadium. And obviously before that, I've probably only really been to games at Selhurst Park before that, watching Wimbledon or Palace. So I think, and the closest thing to that I would say would have been probably around the same time. I'm not sure if it was before or after thinking about it now, but I've been to Wembley a couple of times around then to watch like playoff finals. Euro '96, I was at the England Scotland game. Um, so I would have been around that time, and I think like I didn't realise how big Old Trafford was until I walked inside it, and I was like, wow, this is like Wembley big. It's not Selhurst Park big. Selhurst Park's like a quarter of the size of it. So yeah, it's one of them memories that I still remember walking in, and I took my son a few seasons back. Um, and I got a video of him walking into the stadium, and like he kind of looks back and he's like, "Oh my God!" And it was nice seeing that and experiencing it through my son's eyes because it reminded me so much of exactly how I felt when I walked in. Was like, oh my God, this is massive. Like I wasn't expecting it to be as big as it was, and he had the exact same thing. So I think it was nice kind of reliving that through my son a few years back. He's been a few times now, but yeah, you never forget that first time.
Yeah, there's nothing like, coming up the stairs and then my thing with Anfield was just how big like the pitch was and how
Yeah.
green it is. I mean, back then there was lots of brown spots on the
Mm.
pitch. It's not as didn't look as gracious and beautiful as these pitches do today, but like just the smell of the grass
Yeah,
and
the
just
smell.
that really like has never left, and I always get goosebumps. I mean, I've been loads and loads of times, and I just every single time the hair just stands up on me the back of my neck, and
Yeah,
I can't wait to one day take my girls. Hopefully they'll enjoy it, because it's a lot of money to pay.
yeah,
For somebody to sit there and go, I don't like football, Dad. You're like, oh, I just
didn't
paid
like that.
all the quid. But yeah, it's I see so many videos of first time kids watching, not just Liverpool, but and the smiles on their faces. That's what it's all about.
Yeah,
It's the
definitely.
next generation. Get them
Yeah,
into football, and I think a little bit, Chris, is that's that's where we've lost some of the atmosphere. We've got to get these like teenagers in there singing, and I think like I even know Anfield sometimes sounds like a graveyard.
yeah.
I
The
mean,
right picture, it's like that, isn't it? I think especially like the lower category fixtures through the season, the ones that are easy to get tickets for. Um, you might they can go one of two ways, can't they? Because sometimes the atmosphere will feel a bit like if you watch it, England, like these pointless friendlies that we play through the season, all these like Nations League games that no one gives two shits about. Like you can hear in the crowd they've given a lot of tickets away to schools, which I still think is really important. I think that's one of the only good things about England having these fixtures is that a lot of tickets end up getting given to kids at schools and stuff like that. And you can hear that, and especially like I think the rise in the popularity of the women's game has been great for that as well because you can actually hear the difference in the crowd. Like there's a more feminine sort of noise coming from the crowd. That means women are going to the games, girls are going to the games. And I took my daughter and my niece. We went to watch Palace Ladies. They play at Bromley, close to where I live as well. And that was like we were thinking, like you saying you got girls as well, and my daughter's always on at me like, when can we go to football? And I'm like, you didn't enjoy it when we went to watch it before. I don't want to spend like 10 times the amount of money to take you for you to be more interested in the sweets at half time than the game. And that's kind of like where it's been with us as well. And I think that, like you said, it's just important to make those tickets accessible, and like kids need to be able to go. And some of the old heads will be moaning that like the atmosphere is not as like aggy as maybe it would be for a big derby game or something, but those kids won't end up trying to buy it if you don't get them in there now and they have a great time and experience and love it and want to go again. Then when they're 16, 17, they're not going to be putting money aside to go and watch football, are they? They're going to be spending it on something else, probably like Fortnite tokens or something like that, like whatever kids are spending their money on. But yeah, it's really important, and I think that we are a bit lost if, especially in London, and you look at the prices of tickets to say like Arsenal or Tottenham. It's astronomical. It's absolutely unbelievable how expensive it is to go. Now, even to watch Palace, your cheap tickets there are probably like 55 quid now, and it's like, how are we getting the kids into these games unless it's a pre-season friendly or like a Carabao Cup match in the week or something? It's just the ticket prices just don't budge. Premier League fixtures are just so expensive. Um, but I suppose the clubs have to make their money, but it's difficult. I think you've got to find that balance, and I think a lot of clubs and the Premier League in general are just getting it wrong at the moment.
yeah, but it's a minuscule amount that the clubs make though from tickets. I mean, when Liverpool came over to the States, I was disgusted at how
Mm.
much they charged. It was through Ticketmaster or something like that. So it was, people Liverpool were kind of, well, Ticketmaster set the price. I'm like, well, no, you're Liverpool Football Club. I mean,
You tell them.
tickets were like $150. I mean, this is for pre-season, and it was the first time in 4 years Liverpool had been over here, and I was like, I'm not paying that, not
Yeah,
to see half the squad as well.
yeah,
You know? But obviously, people will go because a lot of people can't get to Anfield, so they
mm,
went, and I was just. Yeah, ticket pricing's just getting out of hand. Liverpool, I think they put theirs up 2% after a couple of years, which isn't too bad. But I mean, you know how it is living back home.
mm,
A lot of people, it's either they got to put food on the table or put the lecky on.
yeah.
Which one do they do? And then a football match, they're like, what can I do? And they're kind of outpricing the locals. And I
Big
think
time.
once you lose the locals, you've lost the soul of the club.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I think that you know, a lot of the bigger clubs as well. There's a lot of like tourism in there. And I don't think that's a particularly bad thing. I think that there should, these clubs are big enough. We do have fans all over the world that want to go and see the clubs. Um, but the soul destroying part for me is like, like the corporate tickets that go a lot of the time unused, and if they are not unused. If you've ever sat in those seats, the conversations you're hearing around you are not really even about football. They're just there on a kind of like corporate. It's almost like a posh meeting for them. They're sat
Yeah.
down talking about like Q1 returns and stuff like that, and it's like no one's here to watch the game. They're just here because their bosses told them they got to be there or something like that, and that's painful because those seats are usually the best seats to view the game from as well. And I just it's just disappointing, you like that so many sections of the ground are being saved for seats like that nowadays. Like you're probably losing 5% of the entire stadium to corporate and sponsors and stuff like that. And people can't afford it, like you said, at the minute, especially in the UK, like we're really feeling it. And obviously my line of work in music as well, people aren't going out clubbing because they ain't got money to piss up the wall. They can do it maybe once every 6 weeks, but they can't go every. When I was growing up, you had money to go out every weekend if you wanted to. If you didn't, you were putting it away, and you'd feel the difference of for not going out a few weekends at the end of the month. But now it's not like that. People don't have that expendable income, so things like football, the arts, music, clubbing, pubs, they're all feeling the brunt of it because those are non-essential. I think football a little bit different because I think if you're really into football, you're just not going to miss it. You buy a season ticket, you're there every weekend, and you've budgeted for that year after year. You kind of know, well, that's an expense. You almost treat it like a bill. But all the other things, like the treats, the takeaways you might have had, the trips to the cinema, going out on a weekend, having a meal out, that kind of thing. They all struggle the most first. But definitely put football into that. I just think we're feeling it now, and I think that this is where clubs have to get really clever with their ticket pricing to make it more available to people that might only be able to treat themselves once a month, if that.
Well, that's why I kind of like how the German league does theirs, ticket prices. It's just, but that's never going to happen in the UK just because the Premier League is the most watched league in the
Yeah,
world. These clubs aren't going to go, yeah, you can come in for 20 quid. That's not going to
exactly.
happen. And it is sad. But I wanted to talk to you about, you are, as a United fan, you watch some amazing United teams and Fergie, again, being a Liverpool supporter, I hate saying this, but you've got to give Ferguson mad respect for what he's done. Um, but what do you think happened when Fergie left? Because you've gone through so many managers, and for me, watching from the outside and seeing Klopp leave Liverpool in a very good position, like squad wise, I think
Yeah.
Fergie didn't leave United with a very good squad. And then
No,
Moyes, Van Gaal had to kind of clean up, and it just didn't work. So, what's your take on all that?
I think it's a difficult one because I think, given his age, I think Ferguson was, he was due a retirement, and every season it was like, is it going to be this one? Is it going to be this one? You could feel it was going to come. So when it did happen, it weren't like I weren't that surprised, and I don't ever remember feeling at the time like he's getting out now before the ship sinks. It didn't feel like that at the time, but now we look back at it, and you look at the squad that the players that were there, and the ones that were on their way out, the ones that were finishing their contracts. Obviously, we won the league there. Um, and you got players like important players are coming to the sort of the end of their term at the club as well, like Rio and Rooney was. Or we had Rooney a few seasons after, but it was it. I don't like to say it because I have so much respect for Ferguson, but you have to admit that you know Moyes didn't inherit a great team. I think I don't think necessarily the managers are all to blame here either, though, because I think that recruitment's been pretty shocking. We've bought it's if you can like compare United's activity in the transfer market to someone who buys and sells stocks, they have essentially been buying everything at the top price and selling it at the low price. It's like the opposite of what we should have been doing, which was investing in youth, investing more in, our facilities at the youth teams and the academy. And I think, like when Ronaldo walked out with the furore that he did and did that interview with Piers Morgan talking about the state of, and it's like, you know, light bulb moment. This is where the money should have been spent. When Ronaldo's coming back in and he can't believe that the facilities are the same as when he left like 10 years ago, whatever, that alarm bells should be ringing. And that should tell you a lot about how poorly money has been spent since Ferguson left. And I don't know it, like in Fergie's case, maybe he just had a little bit more weight in the boardroom. And if someone was like, we need to buy this player, he's like, no, we don't. We're not buying that player. We don't need that player. We've got the youth. We've got this. We've got that. I need to buy this player, that player. I just feel like if you look at some of the signings he made in the sort of peak era, Fergie era, most of them were expensive, but they were very effective. He brought in Van Persie, and at a time when we needed a player like Van Persie, and he essentially won us the league. But a lot of people might have looked at that and thought, well, why are you buying him a player like that at this age? He was proven goal scorer in the Premier League. He walked straight into the team. He walked straight into the system, and he just carried on doing exactly what he did at Arsenal. And he pushed us towards the title. And those are the kind of signs, even little funny ones that he made, like Henrik Larsson on loan, who, a lot of people might forget he even played for United. He was a great loan signing. He'd done some really good business. And I just feel like this season, I'd say like this window, I looked at what we signed and I thought we've done some actually sensible business for the first time, probably since we got rid of Fergie. Like bringing in Lenny Yoro, who is a proven hot talent, one of the top performers in Ligue 1. He's 19 years old. He's performing at the highest level against you look at his kind of like performances against the top end of that table, the PSGs, the Lyon, his stats don't lie. And you're a Liverpool fan, you might have, I don't know if you've read that book, the like How to Win the Premier League, which talks about the statisticians that worked on the algorithms and the data to try and identify those talents around the world. And Liverpool did a fantastic job of bringing in people like Van Dijk before everyone else realised how good he was going to be. Allison, lots of big signings they made. Getting rid of Coutinho for like absolute, like selling him at the absolute top, talking about like that stock market thing again. Liverpool sold Coutinho at an extremely inflated price because Barcelona got so much money for Neymar that they were under pressure to spend it, and then they ended up spending on Coutinho at probably like double the amount he was worth. And then they went and spent that money really sensibly. I know United haven't had any of that kind of like cash injection from a big sale, probably because we've been buying players at the peak, and we've been on the other end of that where we're buying those inflated Coutinhos Obviously, we didn't buy a Coutinho, but you could look at how much we paid for Anthony, how much we paid for Sancho. Bringing back Pogba, which you could argue wasn't the most stupid thing, but just didn't work out. We couldn't get him playing at the top of his ability. So he's not like the most infuriating one. He's infuriating more in the fact that the potential that he had was like, Ballon d'Or winning potential that we saw once every sort of 10 games or something like that. Not good enough at that level. But Anthony, Sancho, there's so many of these big signings where we make these big like flagship signings where we could have bought a player that is just as capable as these players for a quarter of the price and not had that huge amount of pressure on them to deliver every week. If we'd have got Anthony for 10 million, no one would be talking about his performances. You put that price tag on him, he's under the microscope every minute of every touch, every game. He is under the microscope, and players that young don't need that pressure. Sancho and Anthony are both under 23 years old. Well, Anthony's over it now, I think, but it's a lot. And I think that we tried to invest in youth, but the problem is you're buying these youthful superstars that are like, as soon as someone hits that level and they're under 21 or under 23, you're paying double the price for them because you're essentially investing in the future. But they're so hyped. And I think Lenny Yoro was like the first one in years where I'm like, I don't think many people really know how good this kid is and how good he could actually be. So when we signed him, I thought, good business. Although it's expensive, from what I've seen of him, I was quite excited about that signing. And, bringing in through youngsters like Garnacho. The only other one that really disappointed me was sending Fernandez out to Benfica when we've got Luke Shaw in and out of injuries constantly. We're playing Dallo on the left when he's better off on the right usually. Mazraoui's actually turned out to look like a pretty decent signing if he can stay fit. That's the big if. But sending Fernandez out to Benfica or selling him, obviously we've got this buyback that Ten Hag's talking about all of a sudden. But for me, he showed enough in his academy performances to warrant a place in a team, in a squad that has a left back who is clearly struggling now. He's at this time in his career where he can't stay fit. He went to the Euros, he got a few minutes, he's come back, he's injured again. And no one ever really knows when he's going to come back. I think we're almost treading on eggshells with Luke Shaw now. And it's just, this is the pattern that we've gotten used to since Fergie left, is buying overhyped players at inflated Man United prices and then expecting them to just walk into the team and change everything. And I think in the post-Fergie era, I'd say you could only really like count a few like successful transfers. I think like Bruno Fernandes is probably the one that sticks out as like, that made sense, that's worked, club captain, makes a difference. When he's on form, he's one of the best in the league. When he's not, he goes missing, as do a lot of players that have played for United. I just don't think we've had that consistency, and I think that's the big problem. And I think in the style of management as well, I think the managers that we've hired are almost like dictatorial kind of, apart from Moyes, say Moyes and Solskjaer. If you look at the Van Gaal, and I think now with Ten Hag, Mourinho had a good balance, but I feel like if you get on the wrong side of Mourinho, it's really difficult to get back on side with him. And I just think Ten Hag is almost like an extreme again. He's a bit like a Van Gaal. Maybe it's a Dutch thing, I don't know. But once Sancho fell out with him, you couldn't believe they were ever going to figure out a way to work again. And he kind of found his way back in the pre-season, and there was all this news of they've kind of fixed their issues, but it was so blatantly obvious to me that was just a way to try and like get his fees back, get his price back up. He's had a good few months back in Dortmund. He's back in the side. He's playing in pre-season. Who wants a piece of him? We want 60 mil. Like, no one wants to pay that for him because everyone else knew what we were up to. And I just think it's things like that, is like recruitment, man management more than stats, more than tactics sometimes. I don't particularly rate what Ten Hag is doing. I think we lack character, we lack identity. I know that's like cliche to say, but I never know what to expect from us when I'm watching United. It's almost like, let's see what we're going to do today. And some games will turn up and be all right. But I can't remember the last time I watched us and thought we were excellent today. I can't tell you how long it's been. And I think, yeah, I never really had that with Fergie. I kind of turned up knowing what to expect. And even though other clubs did as well, we were just so effective that it was just like, it's a bit like City now. You kind of know what they're going to do, but they're so good at doing it. What can you do? You unless you've got the best defense in the world, you're gonna get balls through the lines, and then it's down to the goalkeeper to have a blinder, and it's like difficult to play against teams like that. And that was United through Fergie's era. And unfortunately, like you said, sometimes it's their time, and we're basically where Liverpool were through that Fergie era. Just more and more disappointed that we're letting things slip. You know, we're not bringing through enough blood from the academies. Nothing's really sticking. We've got a couple of like stalwart, legendary players in the club that are trying their best to pull everyone together, but it's just not clicking. And yeah, maybe it is just our time to be a bit shit for a decade or two and hopefully come back better. But there's a lot of things that need to change in the infrastructure, and hopefully, the changes that were made last year, we start to see the fruits of that in the next few seasons. But I'm not expecting much this season, and I won't be expecting much next season either. But yeah, it is what it is. Some United fans get really upset about it, but I'm a bit more realistic in what I expect. And for me, our squad isn't a top six squad. So if we finish inside the top six, we should actually be quite happy with it. But, that's not a club of Man United stature should not be in this position. This should have been planned. We should have planned for this season like 5, 6 years ago, and we haven't. So that's why we are where we are.
Well, I think winning the FA Cup saved Ten Hag's job,
Big time.
100%.
Big time.
And then when you're a bit rocky at the start of this season, I thought like he's going to be the first one sacked. I mean, he still could be. I really thought that like you lot would go in for Pochettino.
I
think
did.
he would have been a good fit. And, I guess I don't know, the hierarchy might have asked him and he just said he wasn't ready to come back for football. I mean, I'm surprised he's the coach of the US now. That's just mental.
Really?
But, a lot of these, good coaches just are sick and tired of probably day-to-day stuff. Klopp was the same. I expect Klopp to be the German manager probably within the next 5 years. Just because, I mean, I can't imagine being a top manager of a Premier League club 365 days a year, basically. Your life's put on hold. You can't do the things. You get a couple of weeks off during the summer, maybe, especially with the way UEFA and FIFA are pretty much using these players as, I call them like racehorses. They're just, soon, that we're going to be playing Premier League matches in the US, in Europe. It's just getting out of hand. And yes, as a like consumer of watching football, we all love watching football. I wish I could watch football, from August to August. That's just me. But in reality, we're watching players get injured, like muscle injuries consistently, and it's been happening and it's going to get worse. But I'm with you with United. You've just made so many like bad decisions on players, and it's not just the transfer fee, it's the wages as well. I don't think you should have brought Ronaldo back. I think he changed the dynamics of the team. It was all about him again. He was supposed to come and save United, and obviously he didn't. But
Tough one, because when he did come back, I think obviously you don't buy Ronaldo to make him a squad rotation player, do you? Like, he's gonna come back and you're gonna have to build that front line around him, because that's he's not gonna sign for you unless you tell him you're gonna do that. And I think that like he was, in certain games he was absolutely outstanding, like hat-trick against Spurs, and he saved us in the Champions League a few times that season, his last season. And, like saved us from some big embarrassing results, like managing to salvage draws and wins out of games we should never have been anywhere near losing points but like you said, Ronaldo at his age, at the Premier League standard, he cannot play 90 minutes every game and then play in the Champions League and then play, you can rest him in the cup, he probably doesn't care. But if you rest him in a Premier League or Champions League game, he's pissed. He's not happy, and it's gonna cause issues because of like the nature of him as well as like a competitor. You can imagine him being quite outspoken in the changing room in front of everyone. You know, I've heard stories of him, in the changing room at Juventus, come like storming into the after the game saying, if we had 11 of me on the pitch, this wouldn't have happened. And it's like that kind of attitude in front of young players and stuff like that. It's not great. Even if you are Cristiano Ronaldo and you can back it and you are who you are and you've done what you've done, right? You still can't really talk like that. So I can understand why he probably like caused this issue. But then I think like since we brought in Ten Hag and he started to kind of like sideline him a little bit, and you could tell that they two of them butt heads a bit too many times. The goals just dried up. So it's almost like the thought of sometimes like after he left, there was so many times I'm like, if Ronaldo was playing as a centre forward in that game, we would have nicked 2 goals. Like, and if you look at the beginning of this season as well, United sort of XG versus like how many goals we actually put away. Now we were underperforming our XG by we had the worst performance and XG in the whole league, which tells you we're getting the ball in the box, we're getting shots on goal, but our forwards are not finishing. And for me, Ronaldo is probably still one of the best finishers in the world. You put him on the ball in the 6-yard box or maybe within 10, 12 yards of the goal, he's probably going to score 80% of the time. And we just weren't doing that. Xerxes looks a bit shot shy. I think we look better with Højlund up top. He definitely has a little bit more of a killer instinct when it comes to, giving the ball in the box. He's not looking to put a shot. He's looking to get a shot off. He's not looking to pass again. Whereas I think Xerxes he's almost like, he's more of a classic 10 than a 9. And using him as like a sole striker is almost like a non-event. So yeah, Ronaldo's a sore one for me because he's such a club legend. I can accept that. I think it was bad bringing him in, but then there's a part of me that's like, you put him in that team now, we'd have won that game. We'd have won that game. We'd have won that game, even if you only had him for a half. And that's the thing that hurts the most because the way it ended with him didn't sit particularly right with me. You never want to see, if Steven Gerrard came back to Liverpool and was kind of like ridiculed out of the club and he kicked off at like the state of you'd be devastated as a fan. And I think that's how I felt with Ronaldo, was like, I didn't want to see it end like that. It's like watching a really bad breakup, isn't it? And it was horrible as a United fan and maybe as a football fan. I know like some people are very tribal about Messi, Ronaldo, blah, blah, blah. I love them both. And I don't like seeing legends of the game kind of like stain their status and their legendary kind of status within the game. And I think that the way he went out was so disappointing. As much as, like you said, I think he wasn't the right player to bring in. Again, he was another example of like, we did it probably more because there was whispers of him going to City, and it's like, we cannot let that happen. Get him to sign here. And I think there's probably more about that than signing him. But they probably made that money back in shirt sales and ticket revenue again. But didn't, in football terms, was probably not the one that we needed to make, really.
Do you have time to talk a little music?
Yeah, of course. Do you know what? Like, I'm just looking at the time now. I thought my kids are actually back in now. That my wife's managed to go and get them, so I don't actually. I've got time. I've got flexibility.
Nice. Well, I always like to ask a musician, like, what are your musical roots? Like, what was your mum and dad listening to when you were growing up?
So I had the pretty basic, standard kind of musical upbringing. A lot of people have like the cool parents who are listening to jazz and Northern soul and stuff like that. I don't have any of that. My parents don't play instruments. I didn't grow up playing music or anything like that, really. Everyone listens to music. So like my dad's into like Rod Stewart. My mum, liked, a bit of Motown, stuff like that. So we had like Tina Turner, Diana Ross, Lionel Richie, that kind of stuff was what I would have heard growing up. And then, and then whatever was on the radio. I didn't have like the crate digger parents that some people have as DJs. Like, but it was normally like quite popular music, what a lot of people were listening to at that age, at their age. They didn't have any kind of obscure records in their collection. Everything was stuff you'd have known. And so yeah, my musical upbringing wasn't really forced onto me in terms of like I did like what my mum and dad were listening to. And if I hear it now, it brings back like not the nostalgic feelings of like for me, like things like Bruce Springsteen and that, I remember hearing that in the car on the way to school and stuff like that. And yeah, that was me really. And then I think like as I got a little bit older, again, it was like in my early sort of like late, when you got your Walkman and that, taking that to school at sort of 12, 13 years old, I was then taping like the top 40. And I think that like I was leaning a little bit more into dance records back then. And then I think when I was maybe like 12, 13, it was like Snoop Dogg. When I heard rap, anything that had swearing in it, sign me up for that. Like, I think that was just like the rebellious teenager in me and my friends who were listening to it. And I actually quite liked Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style album. That was like one of the first things. But then as I got a little bit older, the whole Britpop thing happened. And I think you're obviously like, you're always influenced by your peers as well. So I was always like, what's everyone else listening to at school? So obviously it was Blur, Oasis, stuff like that. And then when I was maybe 15, that's when like jungle and drum and bass started to like filter into people's listening habits at school, going to those first house parties at like 15 and that. It was like jungle tapes from like rave tape packs and stuff like that. It never really captured me though. Like I heard a lot of it, but apart from Ronnie Size, Represent and Goldie, I didn't really listen to a lot of the early jungle drum and bass stuff. And then I think like I was definitely like more again like I leaned into electronic music. Just jungle was a bit too fast for me, so I started sort of my initial personal kind of like finding what I liked. Ministry of Sound started putting these compilations called Future Sound of the UK. I think I heard an advert on the radio for it, and I was like, that sounds good. So I went out and bought this CD, and this CD was a DJ mix that kind of started out at that kind of like trip hoppy, like Fatboy Slim, Chemical Brothers, that kind of vibe. And then it got into stuff like DJ Decline, like Breaks. And then it ended on like Liquid D&B, like Jungle Brothers and Moving Shadow, that kind of stuff. And I was like, that blend of stuff intrigued me. And I thought I was really cool listening to it. I thought no one else is listening to this. Like all my friends are listening to jungle tapes. The beginnings of garage right at the end of my school. I was like, that some of that sounds all right, but I wasn't digging around for it. So I was listening to this breaksy stuff, thought I was really cool. And then when I got to college, 16, 17, 18, that was when that's when I kind of started hearing garage a bit more. And UK garage on pirate radio particularly. So I'd come home with my coursework to do from college. My friends in college would sit there with one ear in each in the class, listening to whatever tape someone's got. And 90% of the time, it was a recording of a pirate radio show or a tape pack from a garage event. So that was my first sort of like, I quite like this music because it was that same sort of tempo as the break stuff. It had the MCing on it that Jungle had, but it was a little bit less constant and in there that I liked. And then I was like, I like this. So then I started going home, trying to find a pirate radio station on the FM dial, sit there, do my coursework, record it so I could listen to it the next day at college. And that was the first time that I really felt like I was going scratching beneath the surface a little bit of music. I think before then, like growing up, my favorite bands growing up were like Jamiroquai. I think that was the one thing that I really liked that wasn't because all my mates were into it. I really liked Jamiroquai, but not. My mates knew who Jamiroquai were, but they didn't really listen to Jamiroquai like I did. And I went to see Jamiroquai in concert like 3 or 4 times growing up. So I was a fan of Jamiroquai. But then, like when I get to the garage thing, there there were other people into it, but it felt a little bit like you had to know where to find it. And in Garage's case, that was pirate radio. And, you know, finding pirate radio stations was easy enough. If you had an FM dial in your house, you could just kind of like scan along it until like you pick up a bit of crackly, you know, pirate radio comes in, you find something that's half decent enough to listen to without like it being too crackly. And I was happy enough to sit there, record, listen to that. So from there, it was just listening to garage tape packs. Hearing DJ EZ was the one. When I heard him on a tape pack, my friend brought in, it was like the way he mixed and the songs that he selected and the way they kind of like dropped into each other was different to any other DJ sets that I'd heard, and it really made me want to DJ. And so part of that was learning to DJ, but then I think I didn't particularly like when the DJs talked over the tunes on the radio, and everyone done it. So on the pirate radio, you've always got someone talking on the microphone. So I'm recording these things. I mean, I wish I had just had these set tapes without the DJ talking all over them, but that you just couldn't get that unless like a mix CD came out, and then it'd be, you know, again, very rare for that kind of music for the song to come out as like a garage mix compilation. There'd probably only be one or two a year, so you'd be looking at like pure garage, pure silk, and then the occasional other thing that would end up on CD. So everything was still tapes, but yeah, when I started getting into DJing, it was like, oh, I can just, even before I really knew how to mix, I was quite happy just recording that entire song on its own onto a cassette and listening to that, because unless you were a DJ, you couldn't do that. You couldn't, this is pre any of this music really coming out on CD. It was all vinyl. So it was the only way to get hold of it. Because it was not being sold in like major record stores unless it got signed to a major, at which point it's probably been heard by people like myself for about 18 months. So you're sick and tired of the song by the time it ends up on Top of the Pops. Like all those garage records, Little Bit of Luck, you know, Flowers, all those famous ones that most sort of regular radio listeners might be aware of. We had heard those songs on the underground for at least a year before the majors picked them up. They'd have done 200,000 units on the underground that have gone completely unrecorded because the independent record stores don't report back to the chart companies. So they're probably outselling a lot of like the songs in the top 40, but completely unbeknownst to anyone in the major labels who was so out of touch with what was actually going on in the clubs back then. But yeah, I was so obsessed with that style of music, and it was a hobby that turned into a job. I never got into it thinking it would ever be a job for me. I just thought it was a bit of fun. Thought I'd be mixing in my bedroom. Then it was like, right, I want to get on radio. Then I got on radio. It's like, I want to get in the raves. And then it was like, how do I make tunes? It was just, once you realize you're good at something, it's like, how can I get next level? And it's the same, I guess, with footballers that are like, you get into the academy, great. How do I get into the first team? I need a loan. I need to show what I'm about. Get a loan. Have a great loan. Get a new contract. Do you want to get into the England team? It's the same thing. It's just a different, obviously, a different what's the word? Different medium, if you like. But yeah, it's just been a constant thing for me, and I guess like this has been my full-time job for 20 years now. Yeah, I run a label. I tour as a DJ. I make music. I've done other bits of jobs within the industry. My first job in the industry was in distribution, selling records down the phone to all the shops. So there's probably not enough shops for a job like that to exist anymore. But yeah, that was I've been in the industry now for over 20 years. So 20 years full time. Probably trying to think when I did that distribution job. That would have been around 2002. So yeah, probably like 22 years I've been working now in the industry.
Well, it's crazy because, you know, I read you bought your first pair of decks from your mate for 150 quid.
Yeah.
That's insane. He must have really needed the money.
Yeah. He wanted the money to buy a computer. He had his decks, and that was my introduction to like having a go on the decks. He was in college. We were both doing art at college, and we used to have like a 2-hour lunch break some days of the week, and he lived around the corner from college. So a few of us would just go and sit in his house, and he'd have a mix and that. But he was so anal about us touching his decks. He'd be like, go on, have a mix. And then you start sort of having a go, not really knowing what we're doing. And the minute you start doing it wrong, he's like, no, let me show you. And I'm like, oh, I wanted to have a go. You're never getting a go, so I was like, always left his house desperate, like, God, I just want to have a go on my own. Like, so, and he said like his birthday was coming up, and he wanted to sell all his decks and his vinyl and that so that he could get um a computer with Cubase on it. So he had a computer, he just needed to pay for Cubase, which I think was about 500 quid or something like that. So he sold me his decks for like 150 quid, 2 decks and a mixer, and his headphones. And I had a few records that I bought at that point. Not many. I think I had like 5 or 6 when I bought the decks. So I was just practicing mixing with like 5 or 6 records for a few weeks, and then save up. I remember going to Swag Records in Croydon and spending like 100 quid on records. And I think to this day, there's probably only one of those records that was actually any good. I was just like, just buy whatever. But yeah, I started the record collection, and yeah, bought those decks, and that was it. Just like, again, like those decks were 150 quid. They were really cheap, like Sound Labs. So then when you start getting your first sort of bookings or start going to a club or whatever, and I'm having to play on Technics, and the torque on them is so different. It's so much heavier. It's direct drive versus belt drive. So for anyone who doesn't know the difference, turntable with a belt drive is just like, it's kind of, it goes around on like almost like how a bike goes around. It's sort of like a bit of plastic wrap around a wheel that kind of spins it around. So you can almost stop the record dead by pinching like the bit in the middle of it. The Technics are direct drive. It's almost like, you know, a car. It literally like drives itself around like a motor, and that is much harder to slow down or speed up. It's very much like a more well-oiled machine. So the step up from, you know, like slowing tunes down with my finger on the belt drive, which, you know, the slightest touch would just bring it really down. Going into a club and like the mix starts wobbling a bit, and you're like, oh, like trying to like, nah. I realized very quickly after like my first booking or two, I need to get good on Technics, because otherwise every time I go into the club, I'm going to be shit. And yeah, that was it. Like, buy. I don't know how many years I had the belt drives before I eventually got Technics, because the difference in price is astronomical. But yeah, that was the next step really for DJing, getting onto the Technics and kind of getting yourself club ready.
Well, for you, you know, did you DJ for quite a few years before you started producing?
Yeah, I was DJing probably, I'd say like starting to produce maybe a year and a half, 2 years, but like it would have been a solid year before any of that was good enough or felt good enough for me to send out to other people. So I play the odd bit of it myself um, in my radio shows and my DJ sets, but I weren't really sending them out to anyone. So yeah, probably like a couple of years before I got to a standard where it felt like it was listenable, and it might fit into this person's set or that person's set. Um, which was kind of how I went about it, just trying to make something that I think this DJ might play, and or might fit in with what I'm playing in between the music I was playing. So yeah, probably a couple of years, I reckon.
And do you prefer like DJing or producing? Like, what makes you happier?
DJing. I actually don't enjoy producing. I hate it. It's boring to me. Like, it's always been now it's necessary, probably more than ever, because um of like everything being so visual now. You know, it's a video of someone producing a song is quite boring. Some a video of someone DJing in a club and everyone's having a good time behind them, and the whole boiler room thing definitely like visualized club culture a lot more. So now DJs are getting booked off the strength of how viral they're going on in Instagram, TikTok, that kind of thing. You know, if you follow DJ culture on Instagram, you've probably seen Fish 56 Octagon pop up a few times in his robe, and you know,
Fix.
yeah, he's gone viral, do you know what I mean? Like, fair play to him though, because he does know his stuff, and like he's there. He might be a bit of a funny character, you know, he comes from a marketing background, so he knows his shit. He knows what he's doing, but actually like he does know his tunes, so fair play to him. He's done all right out of it. But that's the kind of thing now that like if you're not a producer, you have to be doing that as well. And if you're just DJing and you're not doing something like that and you're not producing, I just don't know how you're going to get anywhere these days. So the production for me back then was a bit similar, but it was a lot easier. It was like playing the kind of music that I was, which was already very niche. You know, there might have only been in the days when I started out playing like grime and dubstep, there was probably only like 5 other DJs in the whole world on the radio doing that. So my competition, my lane was very thin. And in fact, I was probably the only one playing grime and dubstep. It was like you either played grime or you played dubstep. I was the only one doing both. So I didn't really have any competition in that sense. But for me to really kick on, I felt like I was being overlooked by both sides of the. It's like, oh, I'm doing both, which is great, but the guys that like grime maybe think I'm playing too much dubstep, and the guys playing dubstep think I'm playing too much grime. So when I started making music, it was like I want to make the stuff that sits in between that. So I was making stuff with like grime sounds, but I was structuring my records like dubstep, like in proper instrumental tracks rather than a lot of grime was very basic. It was designed so that it sounded good when an MC was on top of it. And I was like, I want to make stuff that sounds good on its own. And the grime producers weren't really doing that much at the time. It was too, the music got too boring if it didn't have an MC on it. And I was trying to make songs that changed through, you know, had a bit of more progression in them and stuff like that. And I think that that opened me up to the dubstep crowd a bit more, even though my music wasn't really dubstep. I was getting booked in that world, and it was being accepted by the people that turn up for those events that usually would moan at DJs playing grime. But if I played what I was making, it was all right. It didn't feel, it felt like it was a bit more than what they expected of grime. And likewise in the grime scene, it was like, oh, that felt different, and that kind of opened the doors for me to push my music into like those kind of techno and electronica audiences a little bit more. When like the Reflex Records thing came forward for me, that opened me outside of that little sort of like UK garage grime dubstep. It was like, no, it's electronica now, and that just opened you up to a whole other world. So I think it was more luck than judgment. I didn't go in with a plan and be like, right, I'm going to approach this that way. It was just like when I was producing, it's like, what do I need for my set? And it just so happened that I needed something that fit in between those two sounds, so that I had the the song that I could mix between this and that. And I kind of still how I approach production now, but because so many people produce now and genres like pop up and disappear in the blink of an eye, by the time that you finish something that you think sounds pretty cool, everyone's moved on to the next thing, and it's so hard to like grow something now compared to back then when scenes took longer to kind of like bubble up. And by the time they did, we're like 5 years deep already, and we've established ourselves in markets all over the world before anyone like outside of that circle hears about it. You know, the dubstep one's a classic because I think everyone knows the word, knows what they think it means, but it means so many different things to people depending on where you heard it, where you're from in the world. And yeah, it's always a confusing one to explain to someone. You know, you sit next to someone on a flight and they ask you what kind of music you play. I don't like to tell people I play dubstep because the kind of dubstep I play, I know is not what 90% of people think dubstep sounds like. And yeah, I think every genre is a bit like that now.
Like for me, I started playing drum and bass and like breaks, new school breaks. I like my progressive house as well. But a game changer for me was Burial.
Mm,
I was like, what is this?
yeah,
Because it wasn't too bass heavy, but it
no.
was very percussive and just like soundscapey for me.
Mm,
And today, I guess you would put it in electronica. If it was on the Beatport genre, I would think you put it in there. Um,
yeah,
you know, the genres are just they blend into each other nowadays anyway. But it was a game changer for me. Just that whole album, I was like, holy shit, what is this? And you know,
yeah.
to this
I think
day,
it was like a lot of people, wasn't it? Because I think we'd heard it bubbling up with Burial. Again, it wasn't like, even within that scene and that movement, being a part of it, we were aware of Burial, but only a few DJs really had access to his music before it would like hit the albums. But I remember the first album coming out and being really impressed. People were telling me, "Oh, have you listened to the Burial album?" And I was like, "No, I haven't checked it yet." And they're like, "It's pretty cool. Like, go listen to it." Then I listened to it. I'm like, "Wow, this is like." It reminded me a lot of the music that I started out DJing. You know, like LB, Steve Gurley, like early two-step UK garage, like the darker stuff. But it was less syncopated and it was a bit wobbly and it was really emotional and it was like dark, but it wasn't the kind of music that you could drop in the middle of a garage set. It would have sounded completely alien, even though it was clearly very garage leaning. It was like, this doesn't sound like garage though. It sounds like something else. And it didn't really sound like dubstep, but it kind of sounded a bit like Horsepower, which was like the early dubstep, or maybe Z Bias, or you can hear the influences in there, but it created its own space. And I think that's when, if you really want to like stand out as a producer, that's what you got to do. You got to take all those influences and create something new with them. And that Burial, those the first two albums particularly, were just like, no one's doing anything like this, and everyone that everyone that's attached to any of those influences that you can hear in there will get it, and everyone got it. Anyone that listened to garage was like, it's pretty good. Anyone that listened to electronica is like, it's not in your face, big build up, big drop. Like, they get it because it's like it's a narrative that goes through the album as well. It's not just like a collection of songs that you've made that are good. They all kind of fit together. They tell a bit of a story, which was also very different for anything that was coming out of the sort of grime, dubstep, garage continuum at the time. That album was so, well, but those two albums were so outstanding that they made everyone think about how you put your album together. An album can't just be 10 tracks that you like. It has to flow, it has to have some kind of sonic palette. And Burial really did that, at least within that section of music that none of us really thought about as much. It was just a lot. It was a coming of age moment, I think, for the scene, that the two albums, that the two first Burial albums that came out on Hyperdub. But yeah, I think it changed the game for a lot of us. Even, people that didn't listen to dubstep, it was like, wow, what's this? But people that were in the scene that knew who Burial was, even for me, listening to those albums was like, wow, this is different. This is unreal. I can't, like, Burial's Untrue album, particularly for me, is so nostalgic. Like, I listen to it now and it is like vivid. I can remember exactly where I was sat when I was listening to it, how I felt, what was going on in my life at that time. It's mad. Nothing else from that time holds that level of nostalgia for me. But that album, it's weird. It's really visual for me. And I don't think I don't think there's been an album since Burial Untrue that's done that for me, really. I think, like, I obviously always check out what people in my peers are doing. And I think the next time anything made me feel like it was gonna make a difference was and it did, was Skepta's Konnichiwa album that came out in 2014. It felt like a reset that was needed very much, especially within the grime scene, and to come from an artist like Skepta, who at the time had kind of fleeted away with the kind of commercial end of things. He'd done the sort of crossover tunes. He was on television like T4 in the morning sometimes, and he crossed that path into the mainstream. But then he made this album that felt almost like, wow, like, this is a collection of songs that really encapsulates the energy when I first met him, and I felt like that was going to have an impact, and it did. It ended up kind of re-energizing the whole grime movement, and then we ended up having artists like Stormzy and Novelist and all these people come through at that same sort of time. But yeah, I think Untrue and then a Konnichiwa by Skepta are two particularly important albums, and rightfully, were recognized by the Ivors and the Mercury prizes, that they were recognized as important outside of what we were all doing as well. And I think there's not been too many of them, especially when you're kind of working within the constraints of an actual genre or movement, like, to encapsulate what it is, to feel like you're still a part of that genre, but be so different from what everyone else is doing, but still relevant. That is art. And I think that is so hard to do. And I think that's probably why I hate production, because it frustrates me that, like, in my head, I've got these ideas that sound great. I cannot communicate that through my production software. Some people are just like born with that talent. and I'm not. I'm one of them people who has to figure it out so much. Technology moves so fast now. I'm having to install and download and learn and figure out how to work these VST synths that make that sound that I'm trying to make. But I can't, I'm not good at sound design. So the sound I've got in my head just not coming out, and it's just frustrating. So I end up just sitting there for days making a loop of about a minute long and then go, I can't deal with this anymore. Turn it off and I won't look at it again for a month. It's like that's why I don't make much music, because I have to be in the zone, and unless something just happens, I get really frustrated with not being able to do what I'm doing, and I can't explain it. So I'm another one of those people. I can't go into a studio session with an engineer and explain to him, this is what I've got in my head. Can you let's make this sound? It goes like this, and then it sounds like that, and then he'll be sat there and I'm like that, and I'm like, you're just doing exactly what I would be doing in the studio. We're just collectively getting it wrong. Instead of me on my own getting it wrong, I'm watching, I'm paying for someone else to get it wrong on my behalf. And it's so frustrating when I think, like I could make cookie cutter dance records. I don't want to do that. I want to make something that feels like gives other people that feeling that I get when I heard that those Burial albums, and it's like I want people to feel that. If I'm going to make music, it has to be like that. I want to challenge people. I want to make something that sounds interesting but different. And yeah, it's very rare that I'll get that to that point in a production where I'm like, this is good enough to release. So I don't release a great deal of music anymore. And sometimes I push myself to do it, so I put some stuff out that's a bit like, we need to put some music out. I still like it, but I know it's not the one. But we got to get something going. We got to get that algorithm kicking in, ready for when I've got the one. Because otherwise, I might be waiting 5 years and then just put something out, which goes over everyone's heads, which does happen sometimes. Some of the stuff that I really do like came out maybe 3 or 4 years ago. It kind of it's leaning into garage, which people are starting to play the last year or two, and I released this stuff like 2, 3 years prior to that, and it just kind of went over everyone's head. But now DJs are picking it up, and it's like, oh, there's a song from 2020 or something that you missed is actually quite relevant to what people are playing now. It was maybe just a little bit ahead of its time. It wasn't relevant at the time, just no one cared for it. But now they do, and I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think if anything, you could be quite proud of that as a producer, that you maybe just were a bit too ahead of the curve with your ideas. But yeah, I think that's how you stand out, really. You got to try and create something new that's relevant still.
Well, I mean, for me, like dubstep became a dirty word in my house just
Yeah,
because of like the Skrillex. It was very the American dubstep. They took it and made it just uninteresting. It was paint by numbers dubstep, and I kind of lost my way with dubstep. Because everything I was listening to, Excision, same thing. It like for me, music needs to move me,
yeah,
and it has to have soul. And electronic music can have soul. I know a lot of people, probably listening aren't into dance music or electronic music because they think it's, not real. It's not, proper instruments, guitar, piano. But electronic music can move you. And yeah, I just lost my way because that's all I heard. But are you a Fortet fan, Kieran?
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I, I think I love what he does because he pushes the envelope, but he keeps it, again, just beautiful soundscape. And also when I heard him and Burial do Moth,
Yeah.
I had that holy shit moment. Just, Kieran just knows what he's doing. But it does make me cringe when he's up on stage with Fred again and Skrillex. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, not again, you know, because I
Oh,
just like listening to Fortet. Like when he DJs, he takes you on a journey. I know, when DJs like I take people on journeys, you kind of like you're up your own arse. But he does every set I've listened to. He takes me on a journey, and I love that. And I listen to your sets as well, and you do the same thing.
I think of like a DJ set's a bit like, because a lot of people say, like, oh, you're just playing other people's music, blah, blah, blah. But for me, I always think as a DJ set's a bit like painting a picture. Like if you're doing it properly, you've got your tools at your disposal to create, like you said, it's like a journey. I don't, I think that was the issue I had as well with a lot of that hard dubstep around sort of 2012, 2013. It just got to the point where it was like all of it was so loud and so clean and it was all big. It was all, there was nothing subtle about it, hardly any of it. And to be fair to Skrillex, I think he was a bit different in that his music was really hard, but I could hear there was some originality in there. His riffs and his synths were really clever, whereas a lot of other people, like you mentioned, Excision, to compare Excision with Skrillex, Excision was more like beats and bass, very clever sound design, big sound, big drops, hard, and like what he was doing compared to Skrillex was like they're both making this hard, insane sounding music that for like your average listener is unlistenable because of how extreme it was. And it amazed me how big that sound got in mainstream because it was like this music is this should not be daytime radio music, but it got so big that playing like a Skrillex record on that lunchtime on Radio 1 became quite a normal thing to hear. And it was such an extreme end of what we were doing in the dubstep world that for me, that someone who liked to sort of select from different pockets of those sounds like grime, dubstep, bits of garage and breaks was still kind of part of my markup. That dubstep was a bit too far away from everything else that I was doing, but it became, being booked into that world. I was playing lineups with those kind of artists and I was really struggling to connect with the audience, which is really frustrating as a DJ who likes to try and paint a journey or a picture for people. Whereas, you're playing in a crowd of people that just want to headbang for a whole hour of your set. And I'll have a moment or two in my set where it gets hard, but we'll get to that. We'll get there. Don't worry. Like, bear with me. We're going to get to that. A lot of those audiences didn't want to wait for that. And it was hard for me. Which is kind of why I kind of pared back from playing a lot of those events and focused a little bit more on that whole wave sound, which was like the antichrist to that sound, which was 120 beats per minute, half time, influenced by burial and like southern rap music, but just the instrumental side of things. And I think that was almost like me cleansing my palette of like how hard things got. But yeah, like each to their own. That sound, and like again, like Skrillex is another artist who really like he nailed it when it turns to like he took things that he liked and turned it into something fresh. And then he probably took like the sounds of people like Scream and Koki and the Casper and Rusko and that harder edge of dubstep and was just like, let's crank this up a notch, but then let's add some like crazy like electro synths in there and like some cool riffs and some cut up vocals. And it was like, okay, this is different. It's really hard, but it's kind of musical as well. And then, like people were trying to do that, but it just lacked the musicality. And that created like that American dubstep scene, which was all just the hardest bass you could find. When I think like a lot of the Brits kind of it alienated us a little bit because it lacked that groove and a little bit of that soul about it. It was almost like jump up D&B versus jungle. It's like people that are into jungle found like clown step and jump up being an absolute joke. And it was like, that's how a lot of the Brits felt about that sound of dubstep. It was just like, yeah, each their own, they can do their thing, but that's not really what we're doing. And when the word dubstep became so big, that was the sound that people were associating it with. So like going back to saying about, if someone on a flight asked me what I played, I wouldn't tell them dubstep because I don't play what they think dubstep is. What I play is a bit different, but yeah, it's a mad one. It was for me. It not being able to do that, like the journey set that you talk about, that kind of was difficult in that era. But I think that now people like Forte, and I think like like Skrillex as well. Like I know he's like production is what it is, but I've always been really surprised by his ear for music is actually way broader than a lot of people would expect as well. Like I've met him numerous times, and even like back then when he was like doing all that early really hard dubstep stuff, we would sit backstage and like kind of like talk about music and inspirations and things that we like. And he was well in tune with like all of the obscure electronica stuff, like Ed DMX and um, I'm trying to think of some other examples now. Square Pusher, Aphex Twin. Obviously, a lot of people would have known who he was anyway. But his musical influences went a lot wider than a lot of people give him credit for. And I think that like that's why when I saw him working with Fred and Fortet made sense to me because I'm like, I feel like him and Kieran Fortet could probably have some pretty similar tastes in music. You'd be surprised. Because obviously Skrillex is put on these huge stages where he is so big that he's almost performing a concert to these kids that he's going to have to play his hits in them. He's stuck, but actually, deep down, he wants to be Fortet. He wants to be able to do what Fortet does. He's just not given the freedom by his fans to like do what Fortet does. So him, Fortet, and Fred playing together, it almost allows Skrillex to be like, let me play this like really cool like house record that I want to play, or let me play. And he can't do that on his own because his record, everyone turns up to hear him play the songs he's produced. Not that a lot of people that are into electronic music now, this generation, don't understand the difference between a DJ and a producer. It's like they see Skrillex on a club lineup and they expect him to play a concert of Skrillex records. And especially in America, that's kind of they don't have the deep rooted club culture that we have in Europe in a lot of their cities. They do in some, obviously, in Chicago, Detroit, New York. Those places have that club culture, but the rest of the country is still kind of catching up a little bit. So I think that him play Skrillex, Fortet, and Fred being able to play together, it buys them all like the flexibility to do what they want. And I think that the crowd that go to see a set like that now kind of are slowly understanding that's what you're going to get there. You're not going to get a Skrillex concert. You're not going to get a Fortet concert. You're not going to get a Fred again concert. But then if you see one of them on their own, that's kind of what the crowd expects. But I think in Kieran Fortet's case, the beauty of what he does is that he's expected to play the unexpected, which for me as a DJ is like that's where you want to be. If you can get to that space where a promoter will just book you and not tell you like what kind of set they're hoping you're going to do, because Fortet will play whatever. He'll just find a vibe, and you can put him on any lineup, and he'll figure out how he has to mold his selection to like work in that environment. And that's what I love about DJing is I said, I think of it as a bit like painting a picture, but sometimes when I'm in a live setting, I think of it as like playing a game. I think if I'm doing a mix at home, it's like this is a picture I'm painting with all these tools. Enjoy it. When I'm in a club, it's like a computer game. It's like, right, you're in the club, this person's just played, you've watched what's gone off in their set, you know what kind of vibe the crowd's on now. What have you got for them? And then I'll go in there and be like, right, maybe 10 minutes before I go on, I'm in my Serato and I'm like, right, this song will probably go down well. That one will probably go down well. I've got to play this. I really want to play that. I've not played that yet. I want to hear what that sounds like. So there'll be a few bits that I'm like, I definitely need to get that in somehow. But I also think that this, and this will work really well. So I'll just start in my head thinking, well, there's 6 records that I think I'm going to play. How do I get to that point? How do I get like they're going to be the peaks or what I think might be the peaks? Then it's like, right, how do I start off the back of what they're playing and get to that point? And that's the fun bit for me is like I want to play a set of music that you don't necessarily know but works and you're going to enjoy it, but you're also going to hear some shit that you've never heard before, I hope. And if you can get away with doing that and it really goes well and you get loads of good feedback and the room's busy and buzzing, and that's like playing a computer game to me. It's like you're playing the game on hard, but you're doing well. And you're always like, it would be a lot easier for me to just turn up to every gig and just roll out the same shit every week. All the crowd pleasers, anyone can do that. And I think that's the difference between like a touring DJ who's on the kind of festival circuit and can go to America and play headline shows and stuff like that versus people who are busy every weekend but they're just playing in the bottle service clubs. You play in a bottle service club, do a 3-hour set and just play the same Chris Brown record, play all the current like Drake and Kendrick hits and throw in a few house records and a bit of Amapiano and like get all of that vibe, but it's all like the hits from all of the it's like turning Kiss 100 on in the afternoon and you get a bit of everything, but those DJs will be busy every weekend just doing the same shit, and it's like not that's not challenging to me. I don't enjoy I wouldn't enjoy that personally. It's like cheating. It's like playing a game on easy. I don't know. It's never appealed to me personally, but yeah, you know, it means that you do taking the route that I've taken, I guess, and that going back to the Fortet thing as well, is like you do run the risk of having some absolute stinkers as well. Like you sometimes will just find yourself in a room that just won't be on the same wavelength as you at all, or you'll be on a lineup that is just so alien to what like you actually do. And I think that because I came from where I did in the kind of grime and dubstep continuum, I will find myself on a lineup where everyone's playing quite heavy dubstep, and I'm like, right, even the closest I've got to that is not going to cut it with this crowd. But you don't want to like, I just can't bring myself to just go, well, fuck it, I'm just going to play a really hard set, and they'll have to get on with it, and they'll be, you know, anyone that's actually come to see me play will probably be a bit disappointed, but overall the room will figure it out. And it's like though you do have a few gigs like that where no matter what you do, it's just not going to connect. You just have to accept that the promoters got it wrong sometimes. They booked you on a lineup that's not really what you're about. And I think that I get those sometimes where the promoter just knows the songs I've produced and expects me to play a set of stuff that sounds like that. But when I'm DJing, I'm not there to just play my records. I don't want to do that. The only reason I made records was to try and get DJ bookings. So it's like the snake eating its own tail a little bit, because it does annoy me in some cases that my most popular songs are all stuff that I made in right now almost 10 20 years ago in some cases. Well, in some cases it is 20 years ago, but I don't DJ songs from 20 years ago. I DJ songs from now and what's coming out in the next 6 months. So for me to try and play songs from 20 years ago and make that relevant to what I'm trying to play now, it's very difficult. But yeah, some promoters just assume that that's what I'm going to play, I think, and it does lead occasionally to a few odd bookings where I get there and realize pretty quickly I'm not really what I thought I was going to be able to do is not what I'm going to be able to do, and then you just have to kind of bend to it as best as you can.
Well, Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you, mate. I wish you all the best with the music, and hopefully we'll see a new record, you know, in the not so distant future. I'd be lying if I said I hope United do well this season. I hope you get relegated, but
We might do.
nah, you'll be all right. 11th or
Oh, take
uh,
top half.
but yeah, if you want to check out Chris's music, you can go to plastician.bandcamp.com, or you know, the regular Beatport, Spotify, all that good stuff. But again, Chris, you know, it's so great to talk to, you know, somebody I listen to and I admire, and who is also into football. You know, again, that's why I do these episodes, because I get to, you know, chat with like-minded people, and you know, it's just great to have you on, and just, you know, go back and forth.
Yeah, it's good to chat. I think it's always nice from a musician's perspective as well when you're touring and you meet someone else who's into football, because it's like you kind of have that instant rapport with someone. It's always nice to be able to mix up the chat. So yeah, this is ideal for me. Like being able to talk about music and football. Like, I could probably chat your ears off. Do you know what I mean? As you probably can tell already if you've listened this far. But yeah, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure, and yeah, wish you all the best. But yeah, the same. I hopefully Liverpool are looking pretty good this season. So yeah, not a fat chance of us finishing anywhere near you this season. But yeah, wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, put your notifications on, and we'll see you next time.